The group of 20 leaders, they've all reached Indonesia. Preparations are ongoing as we speak in Bali for the key summit. Let's first look at the agenda. Food and energy security, it's become a top priority. It's a fallout of the war in Ukraine, also because of the declining world economy. Countries that are not remotely involved in the war are also facing the brunt. The July agreement to get Ukrainian grain moving again was a breakthrough. It helped poorer nations cope with food shortage around the world. Last month, it had hit a hiccup when Putin briefly walked away from this agreement. Even though the plan is now up and running, Western leaders will try to put a mechanism in place for future roadblocks. The COVID-19 pandemic was way up in the cards till last year, but the focus has now shifted to the post-COVID phase. World leaders are gathering to shape the new world. The virus has not stopped to exist, but countries seem ready to move to the next level now. Even before the summit started, the bilateral meetings overshadowed the summit itself. Joe Biden and Xi Jinping's closed-door meeting still making headlines. The Chinese leader also sat down with his French counterpart. Experts say that since cementing his power at home, Xi Jinping is seeming much more open to keep the channels of dialogue open with the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin is skipping this year's summit, but not a single meeting is expected to go without his mention. The war is in its 9th month. Russian troops, they've lost ground in only the provincial capital that they'd captured. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is carrying the baton this time around. Now, for more on this, we are being joined by principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal, who's joining us live from Bali, Indonesia. Also, we will be joined by senior East Asia analyst Michael Swain from Washington, D.C. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. Siddhant, my first question to you. The session begins with talks on food and energy security. What can you tell us of the agenda for the day?
Well, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is looming large on this summit as the leaders arrive here at the venue site for the meeting that has essentially started and will continue till tomorrow. There are 3 sessions. The first session today is on food and energy security. The second is on health. These are the 2 sessions. And third is on digital transformation that happens tomorrow. But essentially talking about the first session, there will be focus on how there needs to be a resolution of the crisis. We know that India has been very vocal when it comes to the issue of the global food and fuel prices as well. That has been something that India has pointed out at meetings like at the United Nations Security Council as well. And the global south, of course, has been raising its concerns over the impact as well. So largely, we can expect leaders being very vocal about it. But all these sessions are closed-door sessions. So we can only get to know as to what transpired when the foreign ministries of respective countries or the offices of the head of government or head of state come out with their own statements.
Right, absolutely, Siddhant. Also, what would you say are some of the key things on the agenda for India?
For India, it is a very, very significant moment given the fact that India will be handed over the presidency of the grouping. It will be for the first time since the elevation of the grouping at the summit level after 2008 financial crisis that India leads the grouping. India will be the president of the grouping. It begins its presidency from 1st of December. It's planned 200 programs and the summit takes place in September of next year. And that is why this year's summit is very, very crucial for India. But also there are 2 key aspects for the Indian Prime Minister. First, of course, the diaspora element, something that has been a permanent fixture of his visits abroad. He meets the Indian diaspora here later today. And second, of course, the bilateral component. He has almost 10 bilaterals. And just a short while ago, there was a confirmation that he meets the German Chancellor as well. There is a confirmation on UK Prime Minister, the French President, and a host of other leaders who are present here, where, of course, the bilateral meetings happen.
Right. Of course, Siddhant, thank you so much for bringing us all the latest on this. Coming to you now, Mr. Michael Swain, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast today. Sure. Now, US President Joe Biden engaged in talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping over Taiwan, North Korea in a 3-hour meeting. What is your assessment of future US-China relations and cooperation?
Well, I think this meeting has shown that the two sides have recognized that they really need to start talking seriously and interacting with each other to try to put a floor under the relationship and to try to deal with some of the really contentious issues that lie between them. And I'm hoping that this meeting will actually result in some substance where you get working level groups that will address some of these critical issues, climate, global economics, finance, trade, North Korea, the Taiwan problem, which is a major, major problem, and that they really do have a constructive dialogue and define a really credible basis for constructive, peaceful coexistence going forward, because that's what we really need out of this relationship.
Right, absolutely. Of course, we've seen that US President Joe Biden has been pushing for an open and free Indo-Pacific. What would you say of United States' increasing role in Asia?
Well, I think the United States needs to increase its role in Asia in certain important ways. I think it definitely needs to become much more present on the economic scene. The United States has really sort of put itself out of play to a certain extent over the past years by not joining the CPTPP and not really being involved in larger economic dialogues. It's now put out the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and we'll see if that goes anywhere. But so far, a lot of people are scratching their heads about that, not quite sure how much substance it has. It's not really a trade agreement. And a lot of countries in the region want to see more on the trade front from the United States. So we'll see. The U.S. really has to up its economic game in the region and has to play a much more important role multilaterally with other countries and not just simply talk about the democracy versus authoritarianism and the great power competition with the Chinese, because the region really don't want to hear a whole lot of that. They want to hear more substance. They want to talk about trade, economics. They want to talk about security, sure, but they want it to be responsible on both sides so that they both exercise restraint.
Right, absolutely. Now, as you know, this is happening in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war, and food and energy security will be the discussions will be held on that in the first session. So what would you say are some of the key things on the agenda for the United States here?
You mean in the Ukraine context?
Right.
Yeah, well, for the United States, I mean, there's a really strong need to have all of the G20 really supportive of the position of the NATO and the United States on Ukraine, and to have China not alter its position of not violating the sanctions on Russia, not giving assistance to Russia, and making a clear statement about the desire not to have any kind of use of nuclear weapons or even threat of nuclear weapons. Both sides seem to have indicated this, and I hope that they reaffirm this in future days and weeks ahead, so that Putin knows that he has no support in the international community, including from the Chinese, to resort to nuclear weapons in the Ukraine situation.
Right. Absolutely. Mr. Michael Swain, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast with your insights on this. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.